The Christmas haunting. It was a few days before Christmas when 10-year-old Daniel moved into the old house on Elm Street. The kind of house that looked like it had been around for centuries, with weathered brick, dark shutters, and a crooked chimney that seemed to lean to one side. The kind of house that would have made most kids shy away. But Daniel was different. He'd lived in 6 different places in as many years, always following his dad's work. And he wasn't about to let an old house in a strange neighborhood ruin his excitement for Christmas. His parents had spent weeks unpacking the car, setting up the house, and preparing for the holiday. They had barely noticed the oddities of the neighborhood. The way the houses all seemed too quiet, too still, like they were hiding something. Daniel, however, had noticed. From his bedroom window, he could see the houses across the street, their windows glowing warmly with Christmas lights. But the houses next to his, those were dark. No lights, no decorations. It wasn't until his first evening in the neighborhood that he realized why. It was the night before Christmas Eve, and Daniel had stayed up late, excited about the Christmas morning to come. His parents had fallen asleep, and the house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of old floorboards. Daniel was just about to drift off when he heard it, a soft tapping at the window. At first, he thought it was the wind, or maybe an animal, but when he pulled back the curtains, his heart skipped a beat. There, standing in the shadow of a large oak tree, was a figure. It was a boy, no older than Daniel, with pale skin and dark, hollow eyes. He was wearing tattered clothes, no Christmas sweater, no winter jacket, and his face was expressionless, staring up at Daniel's window like he was waiting for something. The boy didn't move, not even when Daniel backed away from the window. His eyes stayed fixed on him. Goosebumps prickled Daniel's arms. Something about that stare felt wrong. Shaking, Daniel turned to leave the room, but then the boy spoke. His voice a faint whisper that seemed to drift in from the night air itself. "Don't forget the bell." The words echoed in Daniel's mind as he hurried out of his room and down the hall to find his parents. But when he opened their door, they were fast asleep, snoring peacefully. It didn't make sense. He couldn't have imagined it. He wasn't even tired enough to dream. The boy's warning hung in the air like an ominous cloud. Don't forget the bell. The next morning, Christmas Eve, Daniel tried to forget about the strange encounter. His parents were too busy with holiday preparations to notice his unease. As they went about their day, Daniel ventured outside to explore the neighborhood, hoping to get some fresh air and clear his head. The houses around him were decorated to the brim with Christmas cheer, their lawns covered in snow, and the sounds of carolers filled the air. But as he passed the old house next door, the one that seemed abandoned, he noticed something strange. There, on the porch, sat an old brass bell, its surface tarnished and worn. It was odd, no one had mentioned it before, and it certainly hadn't been there the day before. His curiosity piqued. Daniel approached the bell and reached out to touch it. The moment his fingers brushed the cold metal, a sudden chill ran up his spine. His breath misted in the air as if a gust of freezing wind had swept through him. He pulled his hand back, but as he did, a voice called out from behind him, "Don't ring it." Daniel spun around, heart pounding, but there was no one there. The street was empty, save for the snow gently falling around him. His mind raced, but before he could process what was happening, the voice came again, this time clearer, closer. "Don't ring the bell." It was the boy, the one from his window last night. Daniel's pulse quickened. He looked down the street, but still saw no one. The voice, now a rasping whisper, seemed to come from all directions. The bell shimmered in the dim light, its soundless presence unsettling. Daniel didn't know what to do. Should he ring it? What would happen if he did? Just then, a cold hand grasped his shoulder, and he spun around to find the boy standing right behind him. His face was gaunt, his lips parted slightly, as though he were trying to speak but couldn't. His eyes, dark and hollow, seemed to peer into Daniel's soul. "You'll wake them," the boy whispered. Daniel didn't ask who them were. The dread creeping up his spine made his legs tremble. Without thinking, he bolted, running back toward his house as fast as he could. His breath came in short gasps, the chill of the air stinging his skin. When he reached the front door, he slammed it shut behind him and leaned against it, trying to calm his racing heart. But the boy's words lingered in his mind. "You'll wake them." That night, as Daniel lay in bed, the shadows in his room seemed darker than before. His window was closed, and yet he could still hear the faintest sound of tapping. He didn't want to look, but the temptation was too strong. He sat up slowly and peeked through the curtains. The boy stood there again, under the tree, staring up at him. The same hollow eyes, the same pale face. And this time, there was something new. Behind the boy, in the shadows of the house, a faint light flickered. It was a soft, golden glow, as though something was glowing within the house. But there was no sign of anyone else. The boy's mouth moved. "Ring the bell." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't understand what was happening, but he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever the boy was warning him about was real. He turned away from the window, his mind racing. The bell, he thought. The bell is the key. The next morning, Daniel's parents were gone. Christmas shopping, they said. Alone in the house, Daniel made a decision. He couldn't let the boy's warning go unheeded. He had to know the truth. He returned to the house next door, to the porch with the brass bell. This time, he didn't hesitate. His fingers wrapped around the bell's cold surface, and before he could second-guess himself, he gave it a sharp tug. The sound that followed wasn't the bright, merry ring of a Christmas bell. Instead, it was a deep, bone-chilling toll, as if the bell had been rung by something ancient, something old beyond reckoning. The ground beneath his feet trembled, and the wind howled through the trees. For a moment, the world seemed to stop, and then, from the shadows of the house, figures began to emerge. Children, pale and cold, with hollow eyes and twisted smiles. And behind them, the boy, his face no longer empty, but full of hunger, full of something dark. Daniel ran. He didn't stop, not until he was back home, barricaded in his room, his heart pounding in his chest. But as he looked out the window, he saw them, standing on the porch across the street. The children, the boy, all of them staring, waiting. They'd been woken, and now, they wanted him.